Hello, and welcome to the Whale Hunting Podcast, where we shine a light onto hidden worlds of money and power. I'm Bradley Hope, and this week I'm joined by Geoff White, investigative journalist, podcaster, and author of a new book, Rinsed, which comes out in June.
Indeed, yeah.
Welcome, Geoff.
Thank you for having me.
So do you want to just kind of go straight into it? What's this book all about? And then we'll kind of build our way back up to it.
Fair enough, yeah. So basically the book is about technology and money laundering. So I've covered cybercrime for quite a long time, a number of years. And what was interesting was I had an impression, which I think a lot of people do, about computer hackers, that, you know, with a few strokes of the keyboard, they can spirit your money away and steal all of your cash or break into a bank or crypto exchange or whatever. And the picture that emerged was a bit more complicated than that. Yes, hackers are very good at breaking into places, but when they get in there and they get their hands, if you like, digitally on the money, spiriting it away is a different challenge. You need a different set of skills. You need to understand SWIFT transfers or crypto wallets or money mule accounts or IBANs and stuff like that. That's not necessarily what your computer hacker understands. They understand problems with codes, server vulnerabilities, social engineering, all that sort of stuff. So time and again, I found that the hackers were using a sort of network of money launderers. They're still technically skilled, these people. Everything they do is online, money's been digitized, so it's a technically skilled trade, money laundering. But it seemed to me to be a different trade to cybercrime. So I found that quite interesting. And then as I looked into that money laundering piece, of course, they're not just laundering money for cyber criminals, they're laundering money for fraud gangs, for child sexual abuse rings, for prostitution, for cartel drug dealing. All that money is increasingly being digitized, and the people who are laundering it are these high-tech sort of money launderers. So that's what I wanted to concentrate on in the book.
And what is the scale of what we're talking about? This kind of intersection, we know about money laundering the old-fashioned way, buying gold and then washing it back into cash and real estate and things like that. Yeah. But how big is this highly technological form of money laundering?
Yeah.
Do we have any idea?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the problem with money laundering and putting a value on it, as I've read lots of reports and tried to sort of, follow that argument, it's in the trillions. It's a percentage, a very small percentage of the global money flow is laundered money. It's always been the logic, the wisdom. Now, as money's been increasingly digitized, there's no reason to believe that the small percentage of international money transfers that were laundering have stopped being laundering. So as money's been digitized, the laundering effectively has followed that course. What you can look at, of course, is cryptocurrency. And you can say, okay, how much of cryptocurrency is illicit? And let's use that to work out what percentage of this is laundering. Now, there are companies who trace cryptocurrency, and one thing they're trying to do is to trace people who launder using cryptocurrency and criminal flows. They will tell you that it's in the very low percentages, possibly less than 1% of total crypto flow and trade is illicit. The problem with that is the methodology of how they reach that conclusion. So how do you know what's illicit and what's not? If, for example, there's a ransomware payment, companies' computer systems have been infected, they've had to pay a ransom to unscramble them. If they pay a ransom, you can trace that ransom money, and of course it's effectively flagged, tagged, and you can trace it through the blockchain, which is where crypto transactions happen, and they're all logged publicly on the blockchain. So yes, you can say there's some dodgy money, and there's where it goes, and we can add all of those up. What those tracing companies can't do, and I think they'd be the first to admit this, is if there's money made, for example, a drug deal. One of the stories I cover in the book is about a cartel drug dealing gang, who changed their physical money, their cash money, into cryptocurrency and then sent it back to Pakistan to buy the drugs. Well, at that point, the cryptocurrency tracing companies have no idea that cash that went into crypto is dodgy cash. So they don't know the crypto's dodgy. And so inevitably that, sub 1% or only a few percent of crypto being illicit, that will be the lower bound estimate, inevitably.
Obviously, when cryptocurrencies first kind of exploded onto the scene, the big discussion was about how this was going to be used for illicit activity, right? And I feel like maybe that was oversaid in some ways. And also one of the other things I think that's interesting, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that in a way, cryptocurrency was a windfall for investigators, right? Maybe you could talk about that a little bit more. It wasn't quite as anonymous as everyone hoped it would be.
Exactly, yeah. The anonymous Bitcoin project turned out to have sort of feet of clay because, of course, as soon as you're linked, or any activity or any individual, any entity is linked to one of those Bitcoin wallet addresses, the strings of letters and numbers, you start to be de-anonymized at that point. So if, for example, my Bitcoin wallet, and then you see me transferring money to a particular entity, and you see me transferring money to another entity. You can link those two entities back to me. So you can gradually start to chip away at the anonymity of the system. And that is absolutely true. And there is a debate that I'm aware I'm kind of backing into by writing this book about cryptocurrencies and anonymity. The wise minds have always said it's not anonymous, it's pseudonymous. And in order to try and use it anonymously, you have to be very careful. You have to create a Bitcoin wallet address for every transaction, and so on. So it's quite hard to be anonymous. What I would say, though, is that the argument is this lack of anonymity in cryptocurrency, the fact that you can trace everything, it's public on the blockchain, and as you can start to piece together those identities and link them to crypto wallets, it starts to chip away at the anonymity. Yes, that is true, but the idea that that's a sort of bonanza for investigators and the whole cryptocurrency criminal ecosystem has been blown open because you can't use this stuff anymore, that's clearly nonsense. Lots and lots of criminals are using cryptocurrency in lots and lots of ways. And what's at the heart of that is that being able to trace cryptocurrency through the blockchain, which, yes, we can do, is only step one of the challenge if you get robbed of your cryptocurrency or if your money gets stolen and turned into cryptocurrency. Tracing it's step one. Step two is, of course, freezing it, stopping it moving from crypto wallet to wallet, and then out into whatever it is, fiat currency or bank accounts or gold. And then the third job is recovering it. I want my money back. So yes, you can see, anybody's got a computer, can see the flows of crypto money across the blockchain, but try freezing it and getting it back, and you need the help. You need the help of tracing companies, the FBI, the crypto exchanges. Now, if you're a huge company, Colonial Pipeline in the US being an example, a big oil distributor, petrol distributor, they were hit with ransomware, they paid a ransom, the FBI and companies swung in and helped them recover at least quite a lot of the money. I'm Geoff White. I don't have access to those kind of, contacts, the FBI, the tracing companies. If I lose my crypto, it's probably gone. So the traceability is at best a mixed picture, I'd say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the appeal for it is that, let's say you're investigating a kind of international crime ring. If you were to have to use if they're doing it in cash, there'd be lots of intergovernmental requests that have to be made to follow it from stage to stage, banks, subpoenas. Yeah. Whereas in a cryptocurrency, you could just follow the whole trail theoretically, right?
Exactly so. So, and it's a cat and mouse game at that point, of course. Criminals and their money launderers, the high-tech money launderers that I've written about in the book, they absolutely know that. They're like, oh, God, this isn't quite as good as cash in that way. And so the game has moved to, okay, we've now got it in crypto, but we know that can be traced. We know that can be identified and potentially frozen. So the challenge now is what's called layering in the money laundering stage, destroying the connection between the money and the crime, moving it so fast through wallets that the tracing starts to break down, and then ideally getting it into the hands of a crypto broker who can transfer it into an exchange that doesn't really comply with law enforcement demands, or changing it into fiat currency, pounds, dollars that can be spent. Putting it onto iTunes gift cards is one of the tactics that's been used. The other thing that's happened, which is a big zone of debate in the crypto world and the crime and laundering world, is crypto mixers, which take incoming crypto, as the name would suggest, they mix it with other crypto and then spit it back out to a fresh wallet address. Now, you're probably thinking, well, that's money laundering. Why would you invent a system like that? It also preserves privacy. If you want to donate to, for example, Ukraine, you don't particularly want your transactions to be out there where the Russian Federation can see them. So you could use a mixer to do those transfers. These mixers are incredibly controversial, and they are also a reaction, to a certain extent, by the criminal community to have somewhere else to take their money that can't be traced. The US government is cracking down on those mixers one after the other. We've seen multiple Department of Justice actions against those crypto mixers over the past year, and that work is ongoing. And of course, we've seen things like FTX and Binance. The willingness of certainly the US system and the US financial and justice system to tolerate that kind of mixing is really starting to diminish. They're going after them with gusto.
Maybe you could walk us through one of the most sophisticated examples you came across of a criminal group using cryptocurrency, laundering it in these complex ways, and then getting it out in cash on the other side. Can you give an example like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the sort of closing chapter of the book, you always want, as well you're aware as an author, you want the sort of payoff chapter, the kind of blockbuster chapter at the end. The last chapter, for instance, is about a hack on a video game called Axie Infinity. It's a video game based in Southeast Asia. I'm not a gamer. I don't know whether you're a big gamer.
I haven't tried this one.
No, okay. Popular in Southeast Asia, less so outside of that region. It turned out to be massively popular, this game, because it was during lockdown. crypto prices were going up. This whole game was based on crypto. So yes, you're playing a video game, but you're not buying the game outright. You're actually investing crypto in the game in order to play. And so players were playing this. They were making money off the crypto. They were buying and selling their little characters in the game. Hackers, believed to be working for the North Korean government, which won't come as a surprise to you, certainly, broke into this game and stole $625 million, which is a huge amount of money. It's a giant amount of money in the form of crypto. Now, at that point, you're sitting on $500 million of hot crypto. Where do you go with it? They tried taking it to normal above-the-board exchanges, and the FBI were watching this happen because they could trace it through the blockchain. They were phoning the exchanges up and saying, that money that just arrived, that's stolen money. Can you freeze that? And the exchanges were playing ball and saying, yes, we're going to freeze this money. So the North Koreans are believed to have lost something like $60 million of the stolen money because it was frozen. Now, and again, as well, you know, if you're a North Korean hacker working for the government, the consequences of you failing at your job are very, very serious. And so losing 60 million of the money you stole, that's not going to go down well with your bosses. So they were looking for somewhere they could take $500 million of stolen crypto and wash it. And that's what led them to a mixer called Tornado Cash. So again, it's one of these services where you put crypto in, it mixes it around, spits it back out. Now, as far as I know, and as far as the tracing companies can work out, 455 million of the stolen money goes in one side of Tornado Cash, is mixed, and that's it. It's gone. Now, to come to the last bit of your question, do we know, can you show me an example where it goes out into, cash money, fiat money? I presume that's what happened. On the other side of those transactions, after the mixer, the money will have gone to various crypto wallets. And the job now is to take those crypto wallets and to get that money into a legitimate exchange or into a broker who can swap it and so on. Now, I don't know where that trail ends up. And that's the whole point, is because it's gone through the mixer, the trail has gone dry. But what I do know is, at the time when the FBI was chasing the money, the heat was on. The hackers had to get the money, get it laundered quick because it was being frozen and frozen and frozen. As soon as it goes to the mixer, you've got time. You can breathe a sigh of relief as a money launderer and say, okay, now let's take our time. And by the way, crypto prices might go up in the future, so let's wait a little while and see how the market goes. Okay, now we're going to launder out $1 million here, $1 million there. You've got effectively a slush fund that you can sit on that's untraceable, that's been cleaned, and you can move it wherever you want in the world. You want to pay some guy in Argentina for missile parts? Okay, transfer the crypto there. Some guy in Frankfurt has got secrets you want to buy, you transfer the crypto there. So you've got this slush fund. It really was, if you're not tracking, if your listeners aren't tracking the Axie Infinity case, really worth having a look at that. There's just been a prosecution in Holland. A guy's got 5 years for money laundering, one of the owners, the creators of Tornado Cash. And there is another case in the US, which I think is going to be September, of one of the other creators. That's going to be super interesting to watch to see whether the US government US courts decide to convict.
Well, what about the part? So let's say you're a drug dealer and you've got $1 million in cash. How do you get that into crypto?
Yeah.
Like, what's the technique that they use?
Well, usefully, chapter 1 of the book is all about that. There's a drug gang up in Manchester. Fascinating story. 2 sisters in their 40s, the Din sisters, who on the surface seem to run a little beauty consultancy, a beauty firm, beauty website, but in the background were trading heroin and selling it on the streets of Manchester. Now, like most street-level drug dealing, the money comes in cash. Manchester police got onto this fairly quickly. And of course, as soon as somebody's wandering around with tens of thousands of pounds worth of cash in their car or in their wallet, there's a police you can question them and say, where did you got this money? It's innately suspicious. It gives you probable cause to get them in for an interview. So the drug gang were desperate to kind of get this cash and move it. And of course, they're trying to send it back to, we think, Pakistan, which is where they're buying the heroin from. Now, normally what you do is take it to a money broker and say, look, here's the money, mate, take a big wad for yourself and then stick it in an envelope and send it back. A few problems with that. Money brokers are obviously going to get investigated by the police. They will be tracking your movements. They can crack down on the money broker. The money broker might not have a license. You can put them out of business as law enforcement. And even if you get away with all of it, the money ends up in cash at some place in Pakistan. How can you be sure somebody's going to steal it? So what this gang did was they started pushing it into cryptocurrency. They had a broker who went by the name ChemDog, who was taking in the cash and converting it into crypto. Now, almost certainly ChemDog was what they call an over-the-counter broker. So he or she will have set up an account at a cryptocurrency exchange and maybe several accounts at several cryptocurrency exchanges. We'll take the cash and we'll put that cash into several bank accounts, so-called smurfing, where you put a little bit into each bank account. They will probably have a bank account set up in the name of business, which seems to be a legitimate business. They will then move that money into crypto exchange. And so there's multiple ways ChemDog would have been moving that money around. Again, this would have taken time, but ChemDog was receiving a cut. Now, interestingly, because we can trace the crypto transactions from ChemDog onwards, we can see what we think is the cut that ChemDog took. And according to Chainalysis, one of the tracing companies, it was 4% was the cut. That is very low. I mean, money laundering, you'll look at 20% upwards, up to 60% for some deals. 4% is an absolute steal. So we know that that's how the drug gangs are sort of trying to push their money into crypto. And of course, from there, off it goes to Pakistan in one giant leap. And there you go. The money's in Pakistan. No jeopardy of it getting stolen at the airport or, interdicted on the way. The money just moves seamlessly. So an amazing case.
Yeah. And I suppose the way it exits is almost the same way, another kind of over-the-counter broker, right?
Yeah, there'll be somebody in Pakistan. Yeah, there'll be people in Pakistan who want to buy cryptocurrency in exchange for cash. So a broker in Pakistan will say, hey, do you want to buy this new Bitcoin thing? Great, give us your cash. I give you the Bitcoin. That's now been cleaned. And that cash then gets moved to the drug dealers who put the heroin in the envelopes and send it over.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Wow, that's fascinating. And do you think that with all of the innovations around law enforcement in getting smart about this, that it's genuinely becoming difficult to use it as a criminal technique?
It's getting harder to get away with it. What's been interesting is more and more what you might call street level cops, ground level cops. That's a bad way of putting it. They're not pounding the pavement or whatever. Investigators, cops are investigating cases, and it's trafficking and it's drug dealing and it's petty crime, stuff like that. They are coming across crypto again and again. One of the interesting things in Europe was the EncroChat case, and they came across this. Encrypted phones, very, very well encrypted phones, that eventually got hacked into by, I think it was French and Dutch law enforcement, found a backdoor into the phones. Now, these phones were hugely popular with crooks. Lots and lots of crooks using EncroChat phones to communicate with each other. After they get broken open, of course, law enforcement agencies start to look at the messages being sent, and they realise that loads and loads and loads of crooks, who you would not normally expect, gun runners and drug dealers, they're all using crypto. Crypto became their kind of system. And I think that changed the game, particularly in Europe. Suddenly, police officers are like, whoa, okay, we didn't know this, but now we're onto it. Of course, the companies that are tracing the cryptocurrency transactions and that law enforcement relies on are usually private companies. The name's well known, Chainalysis, Elliptic, TRM Labs, and so on, big companies who are doing this tracing. But what they're doing is making software available. So a cop at their desk can click a few links and see in front of them the crypto moving. So all of that's happened, all that's pushed forward. But as I say, it's a cat and mouse game. The hackers, the money launderers, they know exactly how that works. They know that a cop can sit there tracing the transactions. So the next thing is, okay, how can I put this transaction beyond the reach and the view of that cop in the office? I go to a mixer, I go to an over-the-counter broker, I put it into some shadowy exchange that's not going to answer their phone calls. So there's this game going on to move the money.
You mentioned earlier about North Korea. Obviously, that was your big previous project, Lazarus Heist. It started as a podcast and then as a book. Can you just talk a little bit more? I mean, I think people still can't get their heads around the idea that North Koreans, with their resources and education system, got to be so good at hacking. Yeah. Maybe you can just kind of do a little bit of Lazarus and then bring it to Rinst as well.
Yeah, sure. So this is the fascinating thing about North Korea. It's a place where, as well, having written your book, the vast majority of people don't have computers or access to the internet, and yet is a sort of tier one cyber threat, certainly to the UK, and I presume that applies to other countries as well. I mean, the first thing to say is North Koreans are incredibly ingenious people, and they've had to be because they're sealed off from the outside world. You've got to create your own stuff. North Korea's also got this thing called juche, which I think I pronounced correctly. It's about self-reliance. We will, and that comes off the fact that North Korea did not massively like being reliant on Russia or China for stuff. They wanted to do their own thing. Famously, there's a story about tractors. They wanted to buy tractors from the Russian government, so they got some. Then they wanted to design their own tractors, but the Russians wouldn't give them the blueprints. So the North Koreans stripped the tractors and rebuilt them themselves to work out how they worked. And famously, initially, they could only get them to work in reverse gear. So eventually they cracked that. They got them to go forward in forward gear. But, that's the North Korean mindset.
Too bad they didn't do that with the nuclear weapons. They would only go backwards, not forwards.
Sadly, they are advancing in many, many ways, physically and metaphorically with that. But so, there's this ingenuity. And computers and software, I think, is an inevitable extension of that. Okay, there's not many of them in North Korea, but the people who get them, they're fascinated by them, and they want to know how they work, and they want to take them apart. And if you talk to cybersecurity companies and analysts who've actually looked at North Korean malware, they say it's fascinating because it's not written like anybody else's. Other hackers, frankly, they're lazy. They'll grab something off GitHub, they'll rip this bit of code off of there, they'll take a shortcut here. The North Koreans, it's almost like it's written from first principles. It's like, mathematicians who could do calculus, they don't rely on calculators anymore. They can do it all in their head. Coders who can write in binary, these people are a vanishing breed. And North Koreans, they create this incredibly bespoke, specific kind of malware. And so the idea that they've now got into the sort of cutting edge of financial crime makes a lot of sense. One of the cases we talked about in Lazarus Heist was the break-in of Cosmos Cooperative Bank in India in 2018, where the hackers broke in, again, suspected North Korean job, and they worked out how the ATM software worked, and they worked out how to make ATMs around the world spew out money, millions and millions of dollars. There are no ATMs in North Korea, or at least none that's sort of accessible to mainstream people. So how do they work out how, even knowing what an ATM is and how that works was a huge leap. So these ingenious leaps that they take are fascinating. What's fascinating now is some of the stuff that's going on. The use of mixers we've talked about. There's also the use of what's called devolved finance, which is cryptocurrency exchanges where there's no one central entity in charge. It's all smart contracts. It's farmed out to the users. This is the cutting edge of finance. I struggle to comprehend some of the stuff that's being used here. And yet the North Koreans apparently have not only understood this, but worked out how to manipulate and hack it. And the irony, the overarching irony of all of this is, the world's first communist country is now actively engaged, it strikes me, in crypto speculation because they're waiting for the market to go up in crypto and then cashing the money out. So what was interesting is, again, looking at this from a kind of money laundering perspective, during Lazarus Heist, we'd covered computer hacking for the North Koreans. We'd obviously covered a lot of the money laundering, the famous casinos example where they cash the money out through casinos. That's what kind of led me to want to write this next book, Rinsed, was, wait, I've been covering money laundering without knowing it for several years. Actually, this is the really interesting bit. So it's the North Korean example that led me to look at the money laundering, that led me to want to write a whole book about it.
And what was your pathway to North Korea? Like, maybe you can talk a little bit about your journalism career and how you ended up did you always have a technology aspect to what you were doing?
Yeah, I worked for a tech company. I joined just as the dot-com boom was really kicking in, and then about 18 months later, the crash happened, and I got laid off. So I wanted to become a journalist for a while, so I took my unemployment slip to the college and said I want to do a journalism course. So I ended up doing this course. And so basically then as a journalist, I wasn't afraid of technology stories. I think there was a time, not so much now, but certainly in newsrooms and TV newsrooms of the past, that technology stories were considered hard work, difficult, nobody wants to touch that. And I was the one who put my hand up and said, no, I think we can do a story on that, and I understand which way's up on that story. And so that's what kind of led me to technology. I then wrote a book called Crime.com, which was my first book, which was it's trying to be an overarching book on cybercrime, everything you wanted to know about cybercrime but afraid to ask. And one of the chapters in that was about North Korea, and particularly about the 2016 raid on Bangladesh Bank, the national bank of Bangladesh, which was an attempted theft of $1 billion. It was an astonishing, a hugely audacious crime. They didn't get away with all that money. And again, laundering is part of that, the laundering networks. Again, at the heart of that story, the Bangladesh Bank story, the attempted theft of $1 billion, at the heart of that is laundering. They couldn't get the money out because they couldn't launder it properly. So again, all the way along, laundering has sort of been there in the background. It's just I've never sort of looked at it as a discrete subject.
So are you the kind of guy that can read streams of binary, like in that movie Hackers? Did you ever see that movie it has Angelina Jolie?
Yeah.
It is reading ones and zeros. And, yeah.
No, but there are people who can do that. They're a vanishing breed, but there are still people who can code in binary.
And can you code at all?
I know a bit of HTML. I built websites in HTML ages ago, and I did start to learn Python. So I've written some Python scripts and made them work. I was very proud of myself. But I don't know. Yeah, I think a good job of a journalist is to understand enough about the tech stuff that you get it roughly, but not so much that you then make it incomprehensible to the audience. My job is to sort of stand between the people who really know the stuff and the people who don't know the stuff, and kind of hopefully conjure it between the two.
Yeah, if we were really good at the things we were covering, we would actually be doing those.
We'd be doing them, yes. Yeah.
Laundering money or writing code. So that makes sense. Excellent. Well, we've got Rinsed coming out in June. What was the date again?
13th of June. Yeah.
13th of June. So thank you very much. That's it for this week. Thanks to Geoff for joining us. You can find his new book, Rinsed, online and in all good bookshops from the 13th of June. If you're enjoying whale hunting, make sure to check out the website at whalehunting.projectbrazen.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week for more.